Hello, this is going to be a kind of video guide on the situations I recommend running each of the varying legendaries that we have available as Frost. And so Frost has a lot of flexibility, so even with what I'm telling you, you should definitely try and run them in your own keys and see if they work for you. These are just the scenarios where they're most likely to work best, or you might want to consider swapping to them or trying them out. And I have this little cheat sheet here for you, which hopefully easy to read. I considered doing it with like the dungeon icons, but that was a little rough. It was harder to do than I thought it would be. So we have them written out. We're gonna go through each of them kind of more specifically, and then if you have any questions, you can throw them in the comments below or whatnot. But yeah, thanks for watching. So we're gonna start off with Cold Front, and I'll have some footage in the background running of me playing the legendary. It is with double survival hunter, and you can see it's a little unfortunate. It's just a little unfortunate tyrannical week, but yeah. So the main thing that you want to consider with Cold Front is, are you going to be able to get enough value out of your Deathborn? Right, Deathborn lasts for a full minute, and oftentimes longer than that, because you have an increased chance to proc your Death's Fathom when you're in Deathborn and shooting out those 3 frost bolts. And also, most of your damage is increased a lot at the end of your Deathborn ramp, so you really want to be able to hit mobs at the end of it. So it's really good with chain pulling. It's really good with mobs that last a very long time. Because of that, it gets better the higher key level you go into. That's why I would recommend starting at a 20 plus level, as opposed to doing it any lower. You're just going to find that the mobs are going to die too fast, and the tanks aren't going to chain pull enough for you, as opposed to once you do get to that level. And then I have it marked, it's viable for every dungeon. This is like the very meta Frost Mage legendary. This is what everyone's really running, but in my opinion, if you don't like Cold Front, or if you really only want to use it for a smaller amount of dungeons, the best dungeons that's going to have is going to be Halls, Necrotic Wake, Gambit, and Sanguine Depths. And one of the things that all of those have in common, except Sanguine Depths, is that there is inherent cleave in each of the boss fights, in addition to just being dungeons where very commonly large pulls occur throughout the dungeon, or chain pulling occurs throughout the dungeon. So because of that, you're going to get a lot of value on Cold Front, not just in the single target times, but also during the mob pulls. So those are the best dungeon for Cold Front. And yeah, obviously there is the inherent cleave on every boss fight for relics, which is a big part of the reason that the Cold Front is also quite strong. The last thing that I wanted to mention about Cold Front is the difference between tyrannical and fortified weeks. The only difference that I want to mention here is that for tyrannical weeks, you would most likely want to run Lonely Winter, or you can run Lonely Winter all the time as Cold Front. It really doesn't matter. But Bone Chilling is probably going to be a better alternative for it on fortified weeks. It does depend on your comp, of course. If you're running, like in the footage in the background, double survival hunter, you probably never want to take something that's going to do AoE damage. You'd much rather take Lonely Winter, because you're not going to be hitting the mobs for very long. So, and I suppose it might have been good to mention this at the start of the video, but I'm not going to be talking much about the gameplay of the various legendaries. That's just going to come from my 9.2 guide. This is really just going to be talking about the situations that you want to use it in. So next one then is going to be Freezing Winds Night Fae. We're going to order the cheat sheet. This is what you're going to want to use if you're starting out as Frost. If you're doing anything below an 18, below a 20, I would say that you just almost always play Freezing Winds. I even play it in above 20s, right? It's a very viable legendary. People have timed up to 26s with it. You can time any key that you're going to do with it. It's a very strong legendary, so if you like the playstyle from last season, you're not as much a fan of Necrolord or of the kind of confusing priority that brings, then feel free to stick with Freezing Winds. You can play it in every dungeon. Its best dungeons are going to be Spires and Mists, and you just play it if you don't want to play one of the other ones. That's really it. Most of the time, you're either playing Slick Ice, Cold Front, or Freezing Winds. Ideally, if you're in that like 20 plus range, you're going to be looking to play Cold Front if possible. Slick Ice in the dungeons that it's very strong in, and then Freezing Winds if there's a shakeup in your team comp. If you need to play Night Fae and Spires, say, to double kick the Goliath, like you're watching me do in the footage that I'm showing you. But yeah, there's really not much else to say about Freezing Winds. It's not that bad of a legendary. It's still a great either starting legendary, great versatile one that you can use in any dungeon, and I oftentimes still run it in Mists. And then for Slick Ice, you're going to want to stick to that 18 to 20 plus key range as well. Mobs do need to live for you to reset your Icy Veins, for your Deathborn to ramp up and actually do damage. So it makes it a little bit of a higher level key thing, in my opinion, as opposed to just running it at 15s or lower, which is going to be where Freezing Winds shines. You can definitely try running Slick Ice in a lower key, especially on like a Tyrannical week. Tyrannical top, great time to run Slick Ice in, but that's up to you. Just give it a shot. Best dungeons for it are going to be Theater, Streets, and Plaguefall. Those small target count dungeons where you get a lot of value out of your Deathborn when in Icy Veins, and a lot of value on the bosses as well. You don't want to play Slick Ice purely for the single target. You wouldn't want to do that in Necrotic Wake, for instance, because Cold Front's like a better bridge between single target and AoE. So that's why that's just a better choice than Slick Ice. You mainly do want to take it in dungeons where you know there's going to be a smaller target count and where your single target's going to be impactful. Fort to Tyrannical, your choice actually doesn't really change much. Either way, you get great value on bosses, but with Fort, you actually get a lot more value on the ads as well, because they live long enough for your Deathborn to ramp up a bit. So Slick Ice is definitely strong in both Fort and Tyrannical. I would give it a try, specifically in Theater, Streets, or Plaguefall if you have a chance. So, Disciplinary Command, the main thing that this shines at is places where Cold Front sucks, basically, in my opinion at least. So its best dungeon is DOS, because that's Cold Front's weakest dungeon. There's a large period of time between packs generally, so your Cold Front stacks have time to fall off. Also, there's a lot of movement in DOS, a lot of kiting has to be done, so you lose a lot of value on your Frozen Arms when you get them out anyway. So Cold Front just loses a lot of value in DOS, but Disciplinary Command's there to back it up. Other than that, it's very strong in the high target count pull dungeons, right? Necrotic Wake, Halls, Gambit, same depths. And the lower target count pull dungeons, Slick Ice or Cold Front or Freezing Winds, those are just better generally. And since you do normally run Disciplinary Command with Water Elemental, it's a difficult choice, because that gives you a lot of AoE power, and if you go for Lonely Winter, oftentimes you're probably going to find yourself doing less DPS than Cold Front would do. So it doesn't bridge the gap as well as Cold Front does between AoE and single target. To be honest, I've yet to give Lonely Winter Disciplinary Command a try. It's probably something I should try this week on a Tyrannical week, which I might end up doing, but I have been playing a bit more Fire, so that would also just be the scenario to play Fire, which, yeah, if you're running why more people are playing Fire, the higher keys you go, when you have a Survival Hunter and a Destro Warlock in your group, the ads aren't going to live at all on a Tyrannical, even if it's a 27, right? The mobs. So, yeah. Again, I'd recommend this mainly at a 20 plus key level, just because mobs need to live. You need to also have a decent amount of... Mobs don't really need to live with this because this is a sustained DPS thing, but you need to have a decent level of micromanagement to actually be able to sustain your Disciplinary Command buff throughout all the mechanics happening. And it sounds super easy, which actually I suppose it's much easier with the portal macro, which maybe I'll throw up on screen here, since I know a bunch of people are probably gonna ask about it in the comments. But yeah, so I'd recommend giving it a try. Maybe it's a good flex legendary for Fire as well. So yeah, it just doesn't shine as much as Cold Front does generally. And then for the conclusion, I just wanted to mention again that a lot of this is kind of dependent on comp. Hopefully it's helped you better understand the scenarios where each of them is working better than the others, so you know how you might want to swap it up. But personal preference, or how well you can play a certain one of these builds, is oftentimes going to be better than swapping to the build that's best for that situation. So if you're comfortable with Freezing Winds, stick with Freezing Winds. If you're comfortable with Cold Front, stick with that. If you're comfortable with Slick Ice, stick with that, right? Don't worry too much about kind of conforming to the dungeon. The best use for this is really just a change depending on your group comp. But yeah, it's not that serious. All these builds are very viable in the vast majority of the dungeons that we have, so go get them and have fun.